The table had been set by 11, the polished silver catching the morning light, the linen folded just so, and Vivian had arranged the flowers with hands that trembled more from habit than from age. Vivian, who had ironed napkins the night before and saved the last few dollars of her Social Security for that tiny bouquet, still believed, that this year would be different. Vivian had called Tanisha and Malik the day before, had heard the rushed, distracted "yes, mama" from Tanisha and the brisk "we're coming" from Malik, and for a short time Vivian let herself breathe as if she had been given permission to hope. The hope sat at the center of the table beside the chicken in the oven, beside the peeled potatoes and the salad tucked in the fridge, fragrant and fragile like the flowers she had bought. Vivian told herself not to wait by the window, not to watch the street, but habit, decades of habit, pulled her there, and the sight of laughing families with bouquets and bright jackets tightened something inside Vivian's chest until she could hardly breathe. The clock crawled. Noon, 1:30. Vivian pulled the chicken from the oven at 1, the smell filling an empty house the way a memory fills a room. Vivian set the plates anyway, smoothed the tablecloth, and sat opposite the empty places because doing the rituals felt safer than facing the silence. At 2, Vivian called again. No answer. Vivian tried Tanisha, then Malik, then again, the calls sliding straight to voicemail as if her voice could not cross the thin division that had grown between them. The chicken cooled, the potatoes discolored. Vivian watched hours become a slow abrasion on the inside of her, each tick a small bruise. She had rehearsed what she would say if they arrived, small words of warmth, maybe some complaint that would dissolve into laughter, because that was how she always saved herself, with the smile that fed them and the forgiveness that ate her alive. When the car finally pulled into the driveway that night, Vivian sat in the dark and let the tears come without sound, the kind that made you long for a voice to say your name with weight behind it. Vivian heard the door open and the familiar chaos of laughter, and her heart tightened in a way that taught her the meaning of being invisible. Tanisha walked in smelling of perfume and the night out. Malik came in with a new shirt and a casual grin. Vivian did not rise. Vivian watched them as if she were reading strangers in the outlines of her children. Tanisha with her practiced concern that arrived late and polished, Malik with his easy charm and the eyes that had learned to look away. They told her they had a problem, bills, debts, an urgent need for $3,000, and they expected, as always, that Vivian would find a way. They did not know she had already made a plan of her own. They did not know that the envelope in her drawer held a one-way ticket she had bought with painstaking secrecy. The shock of their request, this demand for money after a day of leaving her alone, was a cold, bright thing in Vivian's chest. She remembered every time she had said yes, the medical pills she delayed buying, the winter coat she forgave herself from, the nights she worked herself raw so that their lives could seem smooth. Vivian thought of the years she had been invisible to them except as a resource, of the times Tanisha and Malik had slipped from being children into being claimants, and of the way they had laughed about her in their private chats. The old woman, one had typed, a cruelty that landed in Vivian's bones like frost. For the first time, Vivian did not feel the reflex to give. For the first time, Vivian let the word no rest in her mouth. It was not cruel. It was a boundary finally set by a life of endurance. The memory of the house where Vivian had raised them, Marcus's quiet hands, the small kitchen where she had scrubbed dishes until her back complained, the nights spent stitching hope from threadbare wages, came rushing back with a clarity so painful she could taste it. Vivian remembered Marcus, now only a photograph and a half-healed hole in the family history. She remembered the small joys, Tanisha at 6 shouting "Mama" and flinging herself into Vivian's arms, Malik with his crayons, promising to buy her the house of dreams with future riches. She remembered the work that had made her hands thick and her resolve thicker, the houses she'd cleaned, the clothes she'd ironed, the nights she had gone without. That history was a long ledger. The entries were all in Vivian's handwriting. When Vivian finally went to the small glowing rectangle of the phone and scrolled through Tanisha's feed, the pictures were a slap. Dinners, dresses, beaches, all the life she had given for without ever being let in on. Vivian found the group chat they called themselves, the Sterling Kids, and read a message that felt like a drop of acid on the last of her illusions. "Did you ask the old woman yet?" Tanisha replied, "I know how I'm going to work her." The words lit up Vivian's world like a lamp in a dark room. The recognition that she had been mocked, used, reduced to a source, squeezed the air from Vivian's lungs, and at the same time strangely cleared her sight. She had spent 50 years as an automatic giver. The realization that she had been a transaction to her children unmoored something in her. Indignation, yes, but also a fierce, unguessable tenderness for herself. That night, Vivian did not sleep the sleep of the old resigned. She slept the uneasy sleep of someone who had decided to think. She opened an old box and counted the bills she had given, the receipts a tally of a lifetime of generosity. $20,000 over 5 years, money that had vanished into parties, new cars, and comments. She felt foolish and furious, and instead of collapsing under those feelings, Vivian said aloud, to no one and herself, "This ends." The sentence sat in the room like a seed. Vivian called Ellie, who had been the rare friend who answered with warmth and not convenience, and Ellie simply said, "Count on me." That small, faithful answer was the hinge on which Vivian's next decisions turned. In the weeks that followed, Vivian became methodical. Vivian opened accounts they did not know about, met a young lawyer named Avery who explained in blunt kindness that she had the right to live for herself, and made plans that sounded both impossible and inevitable. A secret savings, a will that put dignity ahead of entitlement, a bus ticket to a small coastal town she had always imagined but never seen. As Vivian wrote down dates, receipts, and sorted names into piles labeled truth and lie, something inside her unknotted. The anger was there, the grief too, but alongside them grew a steadier feeling, resolve. Vivian imagined a table by the sea, the sound of waves in place of the ticking clock, the first time she could make a choice without asking permission from the two people who had grown up on her sacrifices. She had been called many things, mother, widow, provider, but she was not, and would not be, merely an ATM. She was Vivian, and for the first time in decades, she was planning for herself. The morning after that long, hollow night, Vivian awoke with the strange heaviness of a woman who had cried herself empty. But beneath that heaviness, something new was stirring, something like a whisper pulling her toward truth. Vivian sat at the small kitchen table, her untouched cup of coffee cooling, while she stared at the quiet walls that had witnessed decades of sacrifice. It was in that silence that Vivian felt the first real shift, a private awakening that told her this life, this endless cycle of giving and hurting, was no longer survivable. The spark of suspicion became a flame when Vivian opened her phone and stepped into the world her children lived in without her. She searched Tanisha first, and there was the truth. Photos of Tanisha smiling under party lights, wearing dresses worth more than Vivian's monthly groceries, sitting at restaurants where one meal equaled a week of her pension. A perfect day, the caption read. A perfect day, while Vivian had waited alone at a table set with love. Midway scrolling through that digital gallery of betrayal, Vivian felt something sharp twist inside her, the realization that maybe she had never been part of their world at all, only a footnote when convenient. She checked Malik next. New shoes, concerts, polished selfies with motorcycles he supposedly couldn't afford. Vivian felt her breath shake when she found the screenshot from their private chat, Sterling Kids, and read the words that cut deeper than anything before. "Did you ask the old woman yet?" Followed by Tanisha's casual cruelty. "I know how to work her." The words didn't just hurt, they confirmed what Vivian had been refusing to see. To Tanisha and Malik, she was not Mama, not Vivian, not the woman who built their childhood with blistered hands and sleepless nights. She was a resource, a routine, a wallet with a heartbeat. But instead of collapsing again, Vivian felt something inside her spine straighten. She closed the phone with trembling hands, not from weakness, but from the sudden realization that she finally saw her children clearly. And if clarity hurt, it also freed her. That same day, Vivian reached out to Ellie, the one person who had never taken advantage of her. When Ellie arrived with warm pastries and a warmer heart, Vivian finally let herself speak the truth she had swallowed for years. Vivian showed her the messages, the receipts, the history of sacrifices that had bled into a lifetime of silence. Ellie listened, not with pity, but with the deep, honest concern of someone who truly valued her. "Vivian, this has to end," Ellie said softly, and the sentence settled in the room like a prophecy. That sentence echoed through Vivian when she walked into the law office 3 days later. Avery Jones, the young lawyer with steady eyes, listened to every word of her story. He didn't rush her. He didn't look distracted. He didn't sigh with impatience. He simply listened, something Vivian had forgotten the feeling of. He explained her rights with calm precision. Vivian owed her children nothing. Vivian could protect herself. Vivian could choose where her money went. Vivian still had power. And for the first time in years, Vivian believed it. She signed papers she never imagined signing, a new will, new accounts, new decisions carved from newfound strength. Even as her hands trembled, Vivian felt lighter with each signature, shedding chains she didn't know she had worn. But the real turning point came later that evening as Vivian sat on her bed with the evidence of her life spread around her, old envelopes, faded receipts, and memories she could no longer force into the shape of love. She realized then that she didn't just want fairness, she wanted freedom. She wanted air that didn't taste like disappointment. She wanted mornings that didn't begin with waiting for someone who wouldn't come. And so, with a courage she didn't know she possessed, Vivian did something radical. She opened her computer and searched for places far away, places she had once dreamed of but never allowed herself to want. When she found the coastal town, a quiet haven washed in blue and possibility, Vivian felt something she hadn't felt in decades: hope. She didn't buy the ticket that night, not yet, but the image stayed with her, the bus seat, the freedom, the new life waiting. And as she turned off the computer, Vivian whispered to the empty room, "I will choose myself." The words vibrated through her like a vow. What she didn't know was choosing herself would set in motion a transformation neither Tanisha nor Malik could ever undo. Because Vivian, the woman they assumed would always bend, always break, always give, had just taken her first step toward the version of herself she should have been all along. And once Vivian took that step, there would be no turning back. From the moment Vivian circled the date on her calendar, the countdown began. 21 days until everything she had carried in silence would finally be spoken aloud. And though Vivian moved through her days with outward calm, every step, folding linens, checking documents, preparing envelopes, felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff she had spent her whole life avoiding.
Yet beneath the unease, there was strength building, a quiet fire that came from finally choosing herself. Vivian prepared the house with meticulous care, not for Tanisha and Malik, but for the dignity of her final truth. As she cooked their childhood dishes, the memories tugged at her heart. Tanisha laughing with missing teeth, Malik drawing superheroes on old newspapers. But instead of weakening her resolve, the memories sharpened it. They reminded Vivian of everything she had once been, everything she had once survived, and everything she was about to reclaim. The evening of the dinner arrived wrapped in a strange stillness. Vivian dressed slowly in her simple black dress, the one that made her feel dignified, not decorative. She studied herself in the mirror. Vivian, 70 years old, tired but unbroken, standing taller than she had in decades. When their car pulled into the driveway, she didn't hide behind the curtains. She watched with clear eyes. Tanisha stepping out in her polished heels, wearing a smile that never reached her eyes. Malik straightening his shirt, ready to charm his way into anything he wanted. They walked toward the door, unaware they were walking into their own reckoning, into a truth shaped by their own choices. Vivian opened the door before they knocked. She didn't want them to feel they were expected, only received. Inside, the small talk felt hollow. Their laughter felt thin. Their eyes scanned the room as if anticipating a reward waiting for them. Vivian served dinner quietly, while her heartbeat pressed against her ribs like a drum calling her to battle. She barely tasted the food, barely heard their meaningless chatter. She was waiting, not for courage, but for the exact moment when truth becomes impossible to swallow any longer. When dinner ended, Vivian cleared the plates alone, not because she needed to, but because she wanted the next part to unfold untouched, unbroken. She returned with the tray that carried evidence, documents, and 3 envelopes that held their future, not hers. When Vivian placed the tray in the center of the table, the air shifted. Tanisha's face lit with expectation. Malik leaned forward like a man preparing to receive a gift. Neither recognized the weight of what sat before them. Neither imagined that tonight the woman who had always bent would finally straighten fully. Vivian spoke without trembling. Not a whisper, but a voice that carried decades. A voice sharpened by grief, steady with truth. I know everything. The sentence froze the room. Tanisha blinked rapidly. Malik shifted in his chair, but Vivian did not soften. She placed the screenshots before them, one by one. Their own words, their mockery, their plans to work the old woman. She laid the photos next, the parties, the dinners, the vacations bought with lies, then the receipts, $20,000 in 5 years. Each piece of evidence was a blade forged from their betrayal, and Vivian placed every blade gently on the table, like a surgeon exposing a wound. When Tanisha tried to deny, Vivian raised her hand. No, not tonight. You've had years to talk. Tonight you will listen. The shock on Tanisha's face grew into panic. Malik stood halfway, angry and embarrassed, but before he could speak, Vivian's voice, calm and devastating, cut him down. Sit. I am not finished. She told them about Mother's Day, not with tears this time, but with clarity. She told them about waiting from morning to night, setting the table alone, clearing it alone, crying alone, while they laughed with friends at a party they never mentioned. Vivian watched their faces change. Guilt flickered, but so did fear. Fear that this time something in their mother was different. Then came the moment that cracked the last thread between them. Vivian placed the new will on the table, the new account papers, the new decisions, her freedom written in ink. You will receive nothing from me again. No money, no inheritance, no support. This is the last dinner we will ever share as mother and children." She slid their envelopes forward. Each held memories of their father, nothing more, nothing less. Tanisha broke into tears, but Vivian had learned to see the difference between sorrow and fear of loss. Malik tried to argue, tried to appeal to pity, to duty, to guilt, but Vivian no longer carried those chains. For the first time in her life, Vivian chose her own name over their needs. She walked to the front door, opened it, and stood tall. "Leave," she said softly. "This chapter is closed." And when they stepped out into the night, the wind didn't pull her back, the guilt didn't follow her, the silence didn't crush her. It felt like the first breath of freedom. Hours later, Vivian sat at the table alone again, but this time she wasn't waiting for anyone. She gathered the papers, folded the linens, and whispered to herself, "I'm ready." Because part 4 didn't end in sorrow, it ended with a quiet, rising truth. Vivian was done surviving. She was finally ready to live.
From the moment Vivian whispered, "I will choose myself," something inside her shifted, small at first, like the tilt of a leaf before a storm, but unmistakable. Days turned into a quiet investigation, a private mission, where Vivian no longer looked at her children through the soft lens of motherhood, but through the clear, unfiltered lens of truth. And the truth grew sharper each time Vivian stepped outside her comfort and followed the trails Tanisha and Malik never imagined she would trace. The first time Vivian followed Malik, she boarded the bus with her scarf pulled low, her heart pounding like a girl half her age. Vivian watched Malik walk out of the mechanic shop, watched him laugh with the young woman who clung to his arm, watched them drive off in a shiny car he had claimed was broken. That lie alone could have crushed Vivian, but instead, somewhere inside her, the betrayal only solidified the resolve beginning to bloom. Halfway through the evening, as Vivian stood across from the expensive restaurant where Malik fed a woman wine from a $50 glass, a strange calm settled over her. Not numbness, not denial, a calm that came with confirmation that her children's crises weren't mistakes, but habits, patterns they repeated because Vivian had always stepped in to catch them. That night, on the cold bus ride home, Vivian held the image of them laughing behind glass like a photograph pinned inside her mind, and instead of breaking, Vivian felt her spine straighten a little more. The next day, Vivian followed Tanisha. She waited outside the mall, the minutes stretching as Vivian rehearsed conversations that would never happen. At lunchtime, Tanisha emerged with 2 friends who fluttered around her like decorative shadows. Vivian watched them glide into a clothing store, watched Tanisha lift a red dress priced at $200, watched her hesitate only for a breath before she said, "I already paid off my debts. I deserve something nice." The same debts she had begged Vivian for help with just 2 weeks ago. And that moment, those 12 words cut deeper than every missed holiday combined. In the middle of that store, surrounded by dresses and bright lights, Vivian understood something jagged and final. Her children weren't drowning, they were swimming comfortably while asking her to hold their weight. Vivian left before they saw her. She walked fast, almost breathless, carrying the truth like iron in her chest. At home, she opened her notebook and began writing, line by line, every lie she had uncovered. Each line hardened her resolve. Each date made her vision sharper. And by the time Vivian closed the notebook, she no longer felt like a woman unraveling. She felt like a woman preparing. Midway through those weeks, Vivian returned to Avery, and the young lawyer saw the change in her before she even spoke. Vivian handed him the notebook. She handed him the truth documented in ink and pain. Avery nodded slowly, respectfully, as he explained how her case, her will, her accounts, all of it could be secured, sealed, protected.
"You're reclaiming your life," he told Vivian, and she felt the words settle in her chest like a promise. They drafted the new will, the new beneficiaries, the financial changes. They created a life where Vivian no longer had to apologize for wanting something for herself, for wanting peace. But one decision stood apart from the rest: the bus ticket, the symbol of her freedom. Vivian had searched for weeks, comparing prices, comparing distances, comparing the feeling each place gave her, but nothing called to her like Coastal Haven, a quiet town wrapped in ocean air and the sound of waves she had only ever heard in movies. She stared at that ticket listing for nights. She imagined herself boarding. She imagined the wind against her face. She imagined Vivian, not the mother, not the provider, but Vivian, the woman. Then one night, trembling but steady, Vivian clicked purchase. A single ticket, one way, the beginning of the end and the beginning of everything else. Still, Vivian knew she could not disappear without letting Tanisha and Malik face what they had created, not out of revenge, but out of dignity, out of clarity, out of the courage to speak truth after a lifetime of swallowing it. That was when Vivian planned the dinner, the last supper she would ever host in that house. She invited them both. They said yes, of course they said yes, because they believed she had something to give. But this time, Vivian wasn't offering money, she was offering truth. She rehearsed her words in the mirror. She organized every printed screenshot. She arranged receipts like evidence in a courtroom. She prepared envelopes that would hold both endings and beginnings. And as the days counted down, Vivian felt fear, anger, grief, yes, but beneath them all, she felt something stronger, something she had earned: power. She was ready for the moment her children would sit across from her, ready for the truth they had never expected to hear, ready for the night that would change the course of all their lives. Because part 3 ends with a silent, trembling truth. Vivian was no longer the woman they thought she was. She wasn't bending anymore. She wasn't breaking anymore. She had already begun to rise. The days following that final dinner felt strangely light to Vivian, as though she had been carrying a lifetime of weight and had finally set it down on the dining room table along with the envelopes and the truth. But freedom, she learned, does not arrive in one clean moment. It comes in quiet waves, in small decisions, in the silence that follows courage. For the first time in decades, Vivian woke up without checking her phone for messages from Tanisha or Malik, without worrying about who might need her, who might demand something, who might pull at the little pieces of her she had left. Vivian woke up simply as herself. It was a feeling she barely recognized, a feeling that frightened her and healed her at the same time. But that silence didn't last long. A soft knock at the door came 3 weeks later, a knock Vivian recognized without needing to check the peephole. Tanisha, standing alone on the porch, her face a mix of nervousness and entitlement, a combination Vivian had come to expect. Vivian let her in out of courtesy, not affection. The moment Tanisha stepped inside, she noticed the empty spaces, the missing sofa, the vanished furniture, the bare walls. It took her seconds to ask, "Mama, where's everything?" And Vivian, steady as stone, replied, "Gone, given away." Tanisha stood frozen, realizing for the first time that her mother was not rearranging life, she was leaving it. When Vivian told her she had sold the house and bought a bus ticket, Tanisha's shock turned into desperation. She pleaded, cried, apologized with words that came too late to matter. Vivian listened, not with cruelty, but with clarity, because for the first time she understood that regret is not the same as change. People can feel sorry and still repeat every wound, and Vivian had no years left to gamble on empty promises. When Tanisha realized the decision was final, she whispered the question that even she was afraid to hear. "Do you hate us?" But Vivian answered with the calm of a woman who had finally chosen herself. "I don't hate you. I simply love myself more now." It was a sentence that took 70 years to say. The house sale moved quickly, too quickly for Malik and Tanisha, who had stopped calling and started searching, suddenly afraid of losing what they assumed would always be theirs. But paperwork had been signed, money transferred, decisions sealed. There was no going back. Vivian packed slowly, carefully, choosing only what belonged to her story, not theirs. Clothes, documents, a few photographs of Marcus, who had loved her in quiet ways. Not a single picture of the children. Those memories, she decided, would stay buried in the house she no longer owned. When Ellie arrived to help her pack, Vivian felt for the first time in years what true companionship felt like. Ellie, who never asked for money, never asked for emotional labor, never mocked her behind her back. Ellie, who had shown her what care looked like when it wasn't laced with expectation. The two women worked side by side, sealing boxes and sharing warm conversation. When Vivian handed Ellie the envelope with the money she owed, plus something extra as gratitude, Ellie tried to refuse, but Vivian insisted. "You saw me when no one else did," told her softly. As moving day arrived, Vivian stood in the empty house for the very last time. She didn't cry, she didn't mourn. She walked through each room as though closing chapters that had once made her whole and later made her small. The walls that had heard every joy and every heartbreak meant nothing now. They belonged to someone else, and Vivian, for the first time, belonged entirely to herself. But freedom often arrives with one final test. At the bus terminal, suitcase in hand, Vivian felt her heart beat louder when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Tanisha and Malik, breathless, frantic, desperate not for their mother, but for the life they were losing. They begged her to stay, begged her to reconsider, begged her to return to the version of herself who allowed them to take without giving. But Vivian, calm as the ocean she was heading toward, refused to bend. She gave them 2 last envelopes, letters filled with everything she had never said, every sacrifice detailed, every truth laid bare. As they read, their faces washed in disbelief, shame, and a dawning fear of what they had driven away. Malik, voice trembling between anger and panic, demanded, "Then what are you to us now?" And Vivian, with the dignity he had never seen in her before, answered, "Nothing, because I was nothing to you." Her bus was called, Gate 6, final boarding. Vivian walked toward freedom as Tanisha cried behind her, and Malik stood frozen, unable to undo the lifetime of choices that had led to this moment. She didn't look back. Not because she didn't care, but because she finally cared enough about herself. When the bus pulled away, Vivian watched their figures shrink through the window until they were 2 blurry shapes swallowed by the distance. It wasn't heartbreak she felt. It was relief, deep, unshakable, earned relief. For the first time in 70 years, Vivian wasn't someone's mother. She wasn't an ATM. She wasn't a resource. She was Vivian Sterling, a woman on her way to reclaim her own life, 1 mile, 1 breath, 1 sunrise at a time. The road to coastal haven stretched like a ribbon of quiet promise before Vivian, each passing mile carrying her further from the life that had drained her and closer to the one she was finally allowing herself to imagine. As the bus rumbled through small towns and open fields, Vivian watched the world blur into colors she had never had time to notice before. Greens, blues, golds. Freedom, she realized, had a color too, and it was the soft, trembling shade of a new beginning. For the first time in decades, Vivian felt her lungs fill without weight sitting on top of them. She wasn't anyone's burden. She wasn't anyone's provider. She wasn't waiting for apologies that would never come. Vivian was simply alive, and the air tasted different because of it. When the bus pulled into the small coastal haven station at dawn, the sunlight touched the world with gentle hands. Vivian stepped down onto the pavement slowly, letting the moments settle into her bones. She had imagined the ocean 1,000 times in her life, but imagining it was nothing like hearing it. The soft, rhythmic crashing of waves felt like a heartbeat calling her home. Vivian stood still for a long moment, letting the salt-filled wind brush her face like a welcome she had waited 70 years to receive. And for the first time since she was a young woman, Vivian smiled without forcing it. At the little hotel, Brenda welcomed Vivian with warmth instead of expectation. "You'll love it here," she said, handing her the room key, and Vivian, feeling the truth of that statement humming inside her, replied softly, "I already do." The room was simple, clean, and bright, but the window, oh, the window, it opened directly to the sea. When Vivian pushed the curtains aside, she felt something inside her loosen completely. Seagulls flew overhead, the water glimmered, the sky seemed to stretch forever as though offering her all the space she had never been given in her life. Over the next few days, Vivian discovered pieces of herself she didn't know were still alive. She walked barefoot along the shore, letting the cold waves wash over her ankles. She breathed deeply, inhaling a kind of peace she had once believed belonged only to other people. She watched sunrises she had missed all her life because she was always working, always worrying, always giving. Now she was giving only to herself, and it felt like medicine. When Vivian met Gloria Jenkins, the older woman in the wide hat, it felt like meeting a kindred spirit. Gloria spoke openly about how she too had once fled a life that suffocated her, how Coastal Haven had given her back her breath, her joy, her identity. She invited Vivian to the Tuesday Women's Circle, not a place of gossip, but a place of healing. These women weren't waiting for anyone to save them. They had saved themselves. And as Vivian sat among them, sharing tea and stories, something profound happened to her. She felt seen, not used, not drained, not taken for granted, seen. Weeks passed like soft waves brushing the shore. Vivian found the perfect little house, a cozy 2-bedroom with white curtains and a small wooden deck overlooking the ocean. She bought it with ease, with her own money, with her own choice. Signing the deed felt like signing her name at the end of a long, painful book, but turning the page into a new one she would write herself. She furnished it lightly, simply. New dishes, new sheets, new memories waiting to be made. Every object in the house belonged to her story alone. And slowly, beautifully, Vivian healed. She stopped checking her phone. She stopped waiting for calls she no longer needed. She stopped feeling that old ache when she thought of Tanisha and Malik. They no longer had power over her heart. The door had closed completely, and on the other side was a woman she had never had the courage to meet. Vivian, the free one. Months later, Ellie called to say the children had been looking for her, panicked, guilty, confused. But Vivian simply thanked her friend and continued her walk along the beach because she knew now, love without respect isn't love at all, and peace without guilt is a blessing too rare to surrender. On her 71st birthday, surrounded by her new friends, Vivian felt something she hadn't felt in years. Joy that didn't come from pleasing others. Joy that belonged entirely to her. They sang for her. They hugged her. They brought her simple, thoughtful gifts. And Vivian, with tears forming softly, realized she had finally found a family, one she never had to finance, rescue, or endure. That evening, as the sun sank into the ocean in shades of orange and rose, Vivian sat on her deck with a blanket over her knees and a cup of warm tea in her hand. She opened her diary, the one she had kept since leaving her old life behind, and she wrote, "My name is Vivian, not Mama, not the old woman. Vivian, a woman who chose herself when no one else would. A woman who finally learned that endings are also doorways. A woman who woke up one day and decided to live." The waves rose and fell, whispering back to her. The stars blinked awake above the horizon. The air carried the gentle promise of tomorrow. Vivian leaned back, closed her eyes, and smiled, because for the first time in 71 years, her life belonged only to her.